Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling a massive topic, one that's absolutely crucial for your IB history revision, the Chinese Civil War. Specifically, we're going to figure out how the communists, against all odds, actually won. So, to make this super clear for your essays, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll look at the seemingly unlikely victory, how they won over hearts and minds, battlefield strategy, and then, this is the really important part for getting those top marks, why historians don't all agree. And finally, we'll wrap up with your key takeaways. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in 1945. World War II has just ended. And if you were a betting person, you'd put all your money on the nationalists, the KMT, to run China. On paper, they looked unbeatable. I mean, just look at this. It's a total mismatch, right? The nationalists have more soldiers, they're swimming in American equipment, and the whole world sees them as the legitimate government of China. And the communists? Well, they're basically a small army hiding out in the countryside with barely any resources. It really looks like there's no contest. So, this sets up the central question for us. How in the world did this massive underdog pull off such a stunning, decisive victory?
All right, so if the nationalists had all that military muscle, what went wrong? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle, maybe the biggest piece, was popular support. See, wars aren't just won on the battlefield with guns and tanks. They're won in the hearts and minds of the people. Let's dig into how the communists totally nailed this, while the nationalists, well, they failed. Big time.
Wow, okay, this table really lays it bare, doesn't it? On the one hand, you have the communists who are going to the peasants, the vast majority of the population, and saying, hey, we'll give you land. They seemed disciplined, focused on social issues. On the other side, what are the nationalists doing? They're letting the economy spiral out of control with hyperinflation, and their government is just legendarily corrupt, with officials stealing resources left and right. It's so clear they weren't just losing a military fight, they were completely losing the trust and support of the Chinese people. And this quote from the American journalist Edgar Snow, man, it just hits the nail on the head. He's basically saying Chiang Kai-shek's worst enemies weren't the communists. Nope, they were the corrupt officials inside his own government, these greedy parasites who were sucking the life out of the country. This wasn't just a PR problem. This was a cancer that rotted the KMT from the inside out and completely destroyed public trust. So, we've seen the battle for hearts and minds. But, of course, the war also had to be won on the actual battlefield. And this is where we see that smarts and morale can be way more powerful than just having more stuff. Just look at the speed of this collapse. It is absolutely staggering. In 1947, the communists are just trying to hold on to their territory up north. Fast forward just 2 years. 2 years! By 1949, they've taken Beijing, Shanghai, all the major cities, and the entire nationalist government has fled to Taiwan. It was a total, unbelievably fast reversal of fortune. So how? So a huge part of the how was Mao's brilliant strategy. He called it the protracted war, which is really just a fancy way of saying play the long game. He knew his army was weaker, so he didn't try to go toe-to-toe with the nationalists at first. It was all about guerrilla tactics. Hit and run, ambushes. The goal was to be like a boxer who just wears down the bigger, stronger opponent, jab by jab. And only when the enemy was tired, weak, and demoralized, that's when you switch tactics and go in for the knockout blow. And here's where things get absolutely wild. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, literally doubled in size. How? Because of massive defections from the nationalist side. Think about that. Entire armies of KMT soldiers, completely fed up with their corrupt leaders and with zero motivation to fight, just gave up. Or even worse for the nationalists, they switched sides. And they didn't come empty-handed. They brought their American-supplied weapons with them. The KMT basically armed its own enemy. It's unbelievable. And of course, you can't talk about this without looking at the leaders themselves. It's really a tale of two very different commanders. On one side, you've got Mao Zedong, who was flexible, adaptable, and a master at mixing politics with military action. And on the other, you have Jiang Jieshi, who was rigid, stuck to old-school tactics, and couldn't even unite his own side, let alone the country. It was a clear mismatch in leadership. All right, now let's get into the stuff that will really make your IB essays shine, because as with any major historical event, there isn't one simple answer. Historians have debated this for decades, and understanding their different arguments is key. So let's take a look at Emmanuel Hu. For him, the real culprit wasn't even the Civil War itself. He points the finger straight at the Second World War. His argument is that the brutal 8-year fight against Japan completely drained the nationalists. They were just too exhausted, financially and militarily, to turn around and fight another massive war. But then you have a historian like Jack Gray, who takes a totally different view. He says, you know what? The battles and the strategy are secondary. For him, this was first and foremost a political victory for the communists. He argues the nationalists basically defeated themselves through corruption and incompetence. Their government just rotted from the inside, and the military collapse was just the final symptom of that disease. Odd Arne Wested kind of brings those two ideas together. He says, yes, the communists won because they were smarter on the battlefield and just made fewer mistakes. But he adds, it was also about Jiang Jiexi's massive political blunders. He was so authoritarian that he pushed away all sorts of people and groups who could have been his allies. So it's a mix of CCP skill and KMT failure. And finally, there's James Sheridan, who looks at it from a social angle. For him, the secret ingredient, the absolute central factor, was the communists' incredible ability to mobilize China's enormous peasant population. They didn't just win a war, they built a massive social movement, a political and military force powered by millions of ordinary people, something the nationalists could never hope to create. Okay, this table right here, this is basically your revision cheat sheet. It sums up all those different arguments perfectly. And remember, for a top-tier IB essay, you can't just tell the story. You have to analyze it. You have to be able to say, Sue argues it was the war with Japan. However, Gray contends it was internal political decay. Using these different perspectives is how you demonstrate that you're thinking like a real historian. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, so let's wrap it all up and boil it down to the absolute key takeaways you need to have locked in for your exams. So here's the bottom line. The KMT started out with all the advantages, but they were a house of cards, plagued by corruption and weak leadership. The communists, on the other hand, played their hand perfectly. They won over the people with real reforms, and they used a military strategy that was way smarter. This led to that massive collapse of the nationalist armies. And as we saw, historians still argue about which factor, politics, military, or social mobilization, mattered most. It's a complex picture with no single easy answer. Which leaves us with the big question you need to grapple with for your essays. Was the communist victory a story of their own strengths, or was it really a story of the nationalists' crippling weaknesses? Put another way, did the communists win the war, or did the nationalists simply lose it? Thinking about where you stand on that question and backing it up with the evidence we've talked about, that's how you're going to write a truly fantastic essay.